So yeah, I wanted to just thank our panelists for being here today. And I didn't say earlier, so we mentioned that I was an ordained minister. My role at the Fountain of Praise, Global Missions Pastor. And so just wanted to share that. And I wanted to kind of open the discussion with giving each panelist an opportunity to kind of share your story and why this topic is so important to you.
Did you want us to just jump in? Or
yes, can we start with you, Pastor Rasmus?
Sure, why not? Why this topic is important to me. Let me back up a little bit and just kind of tell you kind of quickly why it's important. Well, number one, my husband and I were building a church. We started with 9 members in downtown Houston in 1992, and it grew rapidly within 7 years, we had 3,500 members. And my husband and I have always worked well together. I think primarily because we both have an entrepreneurial spirit. So when it came to the to-do list, the task of things needing to be done, we simply divided the list down by our gifts and graces and kind of, split the sheet in half. He took half, I took half, and off we ran, right? And the reality is that what I often say to people in leadership is that so often we believe that we've been called to those places of leadership, when in reality, especially in the church, I believe that many times we've not just been called, we've been drawn because we have healing to accomplish within our own lives. And so for me, that was certainly the case. One morning, in the midst of a very busy life, our daughters were in middle school. I got up and prepared breakfast for our family because that was the only time really our family was going to be together. To have a meal was at breakfast time. And so we always tried to make breakfast special, heart-shaped pancakes and sparkling apple cider and champagne glasses, And so I made breakfast, called everybody in. We had breakfast. My husband said, "Would you like me to take the kids to school today?" And I said, "That'd be great. That way I can put my makeup on in the bathroom mirror instead of the rearview mirror." Ladies, I know I'm not the only one. Right. And so I hugged everybody, kissed them, out the door they went. I go to the bathroom to put on my mascara. And then all of a sudden I began to feel terribly ill. So I picked up the phone. I called our secretary. I said, "I'm not feeling well. Let me slow down. Maybe I've moved too fast this morning. Would you reschedule my appointments? I'll be in for noon." I hung up the phone and literally had an out-of-body experience. Watched myself pick up the phone, hit redial, and I called and said, "I'm not coming in. I don't know if I'm ever coming back. I'm going to take a sabbatical or leave or something." I got in the bed and proceeded to sleep 18 to 20 hours a day for months. After about 2 weeks of sleeping like that, my husband said, "Baby, something's wrong. I think you need to see a doctor." So I went to see my primary care physician. She took blood tests, ruled out all kinds of biological reasons why I was exhausted, feeling this kind of massive fatigue, disoriented to some extent, unable to really focus or concentrate, couldn't read. And so she said, "Ms. Rasmus, I think you need to see a psychiatrist." And so I did. As soon as I could get an appointment to see a psychiatrist, met with her. On our first meeting, she diagnosed me as having had a major depressive episode. I began to take medication for the depression. Not long after that, I began to experience panic attacks. Never had a panic attack before, but the phone would ring while I was at home, and I would literally begin to feel as though I couldn't breathe, as though I was going to suffocate. I would begin to pant for my breath, and then realized I told my husband, and so he said, "Baby, I think you need to tell your psychiatrist." So I did. She started prescribing me anti-anxiety medication. I had talk therapy every 2 weeks, and I remain in therapy. What I'm here to say to those of us who are present is that, number one, you can live with a mental health diagnosis, but you will have to learn to live differently. That's my story. Part of it anyway.
Wow, thank you for, because I want to hear more.
You can hear more. They're in my book, Learning to Be, Finding Your Center After the Bottom Falls Out.
There you go. There you go, folks. Pastor Sloan, would you like to go next?
Sure. Well, I'm really again honored to be on this panel today, and of course, I've always been inspired by Pastor Juanita and the ministry that she and Pastor Rudy have created in downtown Houston. And I'm grateful to meet Pastor Shon and each of you all today to be a part of this. I think many leader stories often have a great number of parallels. And of course, mine does have many to Pastor Juanita's as well. And I actually wrote about it in a book called Stand, Learning to Lead Through Conflict. So I've been pastoring for 19 years, actually, 19 years coming up next month. And here at this same congregation out in and of course, when I took the congregation to a small, very traditional church, and we started to grow, and we grew rapidly, and that of course brought on its challenges, and we had the different issues that arose. But I was internally dealing with a lot that I couldn't really get my arms around. And of course, I was not prepped. I mean, seminary didn't prep me to handle what I was facing. It never told me how to deal with this type of conflict, especially when you're trying to change the pattern of a church, re-navigate the journey. And there's so many who have their own ideal of what it should be and where we should go. So we were at a point where we ultimately decided we need to move, and we bought new property. And of course, that brought on everything, the big fight. And I think for about 4 years, I was preaching what I thought was some of my best sermons, actually. But what people didn't know was that I was preaching, and I would preach 3 times a Sunday. And after that third service, I would shake hands, go back to my office, grab my bags, run out the back door, go home, get in the bed, pull the covers up, and lay there for at least 2 days. And I would only come out when I had to. And I knew I was going through major depression. The good thing was that I did have a therapist that I'd been seeing for quite some time. And so we realized where I was and worked hard, but it was hard to pull myself out. It was hard to get up out of that place. And so I had to learn, as Pastor Juanita said, to live differently, to change a lot of things. Now, here's the piece that I never told anybody. And that was because of the typical fear that it would change how people saw me, that it might, it might in some way compromise my authority. And especially the stigmatization that happens in the Black community. And then, oh, it's just a blue mood and we don't talk about it. My family, we had that type of mentality. Just don't talk about your struggles. You just keep them to yourself, and God knows you don't let anybody else know about them. But after several years, one Sunday after preaching a sermon in our new facility, this is after all of this has transpired, the conflict, one Sunday I just said, you know what, by the prompting of the Holy Spirit, I've got to tell everybody. And before I could catch myself, it was out. And it was just this moment. And I told him what many people didn't know was that I had suffered from major depression for a number of years while leading this church through our biggest season of growth, and nobody knew it. And so I was afraid. I was really afraid of what was going to happen, how people were going to perceive me. But it ended up being one of the most transformative days in the life of our church, and thus changed the whole dynamics around our church and the way that we talked about mental health, the way that we dealt with it. We started promoting therapy, people to get therapists. And so now it's just become a big part of what we do. It's a part of what I do. I advocate this, especially for my colleagues in ministry, because so many of my colleagues don't have therapists. And here we are trying to pour into people, and we're empty inside, and we're fighting depression, and we don't want to admit it. So I think with the trauma that we're experiencing now in this season that we're going through, I think that this is an extremely important conversation, and I'm just grateful to be here to just be a part of it today.
Thank you for sharing that. Pastor Stewart.
All right, I'm like Pastor Sloan, Pastor Juanita. I'm just grateful to share space I am I consider Pastor Sloan a giant in the faith. I've studied him from afar, and I'm just appreciative that I'm able to share space. And Sister Rasmus, I'm not saying I've read my book. I'm just saying I may have wrote in it a couple of times. I'm just saying that and I may have gifted it to a couple of teachers on my campus. I'm just saying, not that they need to look deep. I'm just pointing to that there might be something they could discover, right? I grew up in the country. My mother was a straight talker. She didn't beat no bush. She just came straight out and called it what it was. We were a Pentecostal home in Southeast Texas, in Orange, Texas, and my mother had enough sense to know when something was wrong, it wasn't her lane to fix it. And when something was wrong, she gathered everybody and we went to the doctor and we went to see what was wrong. My first identification of depression was when I saw my mother, who would cook dinner every day, who made sure that we were all up, kind of like Pastor Juanita, got us up, got us fed, got us out the house, went from that to couldn't get out the bed, to wouldn't eat, to wouldn't even talk to us, wouldn't even come out the room anymore in a matter of about 6 weeks. And then my daddy went and got the reverend, in the country, the reverend, he went and got the reverend and he assembled the elders and they came to pray. And mother politely told them, you come in the house, but if you come toward my door, I can't promise any of you will not leave here without damage. And they knew then to leave her alone. It was that day, mother simply said, this is not spiritual, this is not physical. There is something else wrong and none of you are equipped to deal with it. It doesn't mean you can't help me. You're just not equipped to deal with it. I was in the 8th grade. From there, I went to Prairie View, majored in social work because I wanted to be able to see and then help solve. And so from there, I learned that mental health and ministry can coexist. You can be saved, sanctified, Holy Ghost filled, and anything else, and still and need a therapist. And I say this jokingly, I work in special ed. The people in my head never agree. They never agree. And so you should never, ever challenge the people in my head that don't agree, because then it's not good. On the backside, I also know that I go to therapy. I'm like Pastor Sloan. We go to church standing on Sunday, Bible study on Wednesday. I see my therapist every Thursday. I need enough space to go in there and fall completely apart. And because there are moments, I love the pews, but the people that sit in them sometimes makes my hair turn gray. And so I've had to hire a beautician and a barber to keep, my hair from turning colors. And I didn't sign up for that. I signed up to preach the good news. No one said the good news would age me. Like, they didn't say that. I read Pastor Sloan's book. It was not in there. I looked. It was not in there that it aged you. However, I will like to stamp that when we carry ministry, the mantle that we carry, we always talk about magnifying God, but we never examine that the mantle that we carry is magnified in the unspoken, unseen weight that we carry, and I think that we've got to get to the place where the mental health practitioners, and I say this to my church, I do all things spiritual. If you come talk to me and I do a needs assessment and I determine that this is beyond the scope of my desk, we have now entered into contracts with 4 separate therapists. Not only will I make the appointment while you're sitting in front of me, but because I'm so invested in you as your pastor, we will pay for your first 3 sessions, and not the one that we do the interview, but the one where after they say, this is what's going on, we're going to invest in you, because that's your tithes and offering network. We're going to invest in you to get you to the support you need, because as your leader, as your spiritual leader, as your covering, I'm not just responsible for the parts of you that you allow me to see. I'm responsible for all of you, whether you like that or not. So that's kind of my story, and I think that's good. And I would like to stamp this. You did ask a question this morning, and I want to push us on this. You said, how did we get here? That was what you started off with, Twin, this morning. And I want to recenter us on that one statement. How did we get here? How did we get to the place where mental health became a foreign tool in a church that we use pastors to be the mental health agent? I just want to put that out there, that we've got to get back to that you can be a spiritual leader and still have therapists in place and still do the work of growing your members.
Thank you, Pastor Stewart. As usual, there's you spoke so much, so many good nuggets that I just want to tap into. But before we do that, I did want to give Pastor Sloan and Pastor Rasmus an opportunity to share what services their churches offer for people who need who need therapy, because that was going to be my next question is, once you determine in a counseling setting or what have you, in ministry setting, that someone needs therapy, how do you facilitate that through your church?
Well, one of the things that we did, well, first of all, as I was going through my experience with depression, we let our congregation know what was happening. And I think that helped to open the door over a period of time, with being able to begin to be very transparent about accessing mental health support. And so one of the things that we've done is we have a NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness support group, that meets every Tuesday evening at St. John's. It's free, and because we're following quarantine protocol, it's on Zoom. A person can go to St. John's downtown website, indicate that they're interested in the NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness support group, and then the coordinator will reach out to them, give them the Zoom link, and then they can join us on that Tuesday for a time of sharing. It's a co-facilitated experience where people are just meeting with each other, sharing their stories. There's a trained facilitator. We just recently trained a number of new facilitators to help expand our support from NAMI or through NAMI. But in addition, what Rudy and I have always done is had a list of therapists that we could refer people to and say, hey, here is a person that I think might be helpful to you, but treat this like you do any doctor. Check them out. Can you communicate with them? Are you able to share your most intimate, deep down, dark stuff that you think nobody else knows about or has ever experienced? Will you be able to be transparent? Or as Rudy puts it, now, my husband knows French, so he always has a very colorful way of saying things. Go butt naked. If you can't go butt naked, don't go, because you'll waste their time and yours. My husband is very frank. I don't quite say it like that, but I've learned to say something very similar, right? Because the reality is, if you're not ready and willing to peel back the layers and to know that you're stronger than you think you are in your capacity to be able to see, to hear, to know, and then to decide how you want to move forward. And so Rudy and I, very early on, we knew that we were not trained to do counseling. And so we immediately started trying to create support, getting some quality names of therapists in the community. And we've just tried to sense, which therapists or two might be best for a person, give them their names and invite them to check it out. And just as Shon, in a number of occasions, we over the years have paid for therapy. One of my personal therapist happens to be on this call, and she challenged us with that because she felt that people needed to invest in their own healing. And so, we modify how we support people around that, but certainly we have made it very well known that mental health is, we believe that we are tridimensional, just as the Christ we follow, the Trinitarian Godhead that we serve. We are mind, body, and spirit. And so we try to have access to touch points with professionals who work in all those areas, so that when we fall short on the spiritual formation side and we see that we need additional support, we have names of people that we can refer our congregation to. We can't do it all. There's no such thing, I don't think, as one-stop shopping, but you can have a place where you can call in and get referrals, and we try to do that.
Awesome. That's exciting.
I think ours is, again, much like Pastor Juanita's in what we do. We do keep a running list of therapists that we refer individuals to. Of course, we may do initial counseling sessions, but we always recognize where our ability gets to a certain point. You have to get into professional help. And I think you pretty much know that even going in, because you're going to need more than one session if a person's coming to you. And I've always believed this, that you have to commit to therapy for the long term. We always tell that to individuals, because it's not about just a crisis moment. Life is constantly changing. Seasons change. You get married, you have children, your children grow up. They go through their adolescent. They leave the home. You're empty nesters. Your job changes, retirement. So there are all these seasons that you're constantly going to need that therapy. So, we try to keep a running list. We refer individuals to that. And I think that's probably the main way in which we help individuals kind of navigate that. Now, let me say this, going back to one of the more important pieces of actually supporting ministry. When I was in seminary, I remember going to a seminarian meeting, the Black seminarians meeting, and one night on the campus of Princeton Theological Seminary, and Dr. Johnny Ray Youngblood, who wrote Upon This Rock, was there speaking. And I never forget, he said, at my church, all the staff are required to see a therapist. We make sure that they do. They see him individually and together. And I remember saying, although I did not want to pastor while I was in seminary, I remember saying, if I have a pastor, I'm going to do something like that. And so, just so happened when I got to this church, the only thing I fought for in my negotiations and the sort of packaging was that you provide a therapist for me, you pay for that. That's the only thing I really went hard on with them. So that's been from day one that I entered. But then I made it a point that all of my staff, if you ever hired you, that we would take care of you seeing a therapist. I'm going to make a recommendation. I had no problem with sharing my therapist with them. Some people see the therapist like a babysitter. I don't want you to see mine because you might take them and then I ain't gonna be able to get them back, or, you might find out some stuff. But I referred mine out to all of them and, try to get them to see it and then try to do it during the year where we do have some group counseling sessions, because we're changing as a group. You have people come on and then leave, and then you have conflict, and you have, all those different dynamics. And I think it's important. So for our staff, that's real important to me, is having that accessible to them.
Thank you all for sharing. We're clearly talking to pastors that are woke, if you will, or that get it. And it's really encouraging to hear that you're not just talking the talk, but that you're actively working to walk the walk and make sure that there are resources available for the members of your congregation. Let's pivot to Pastor Stewart's question around how did we get here? What is your, I grew up Pentecostal. You didn't counsel with anybody but the pastor. And, everything when you talk to the pastor is a spirit, or you just pray about it. God will make a way. Just hold on. You just keep the faith. And so there was never any talk of mental health outside of, if someone seemed to be facing some challenges, they labeled it a spirit of some sort and just tried to cast it out. How did we get to that point, and what's the way out?
I don't know so much all the history around how we got to this point. But I think one of the ways out is the way that Shon and Timothy and I are sharing, and that is by being vulnerable and transparent. I don't know if I really ever preach a sermon now and not in some way talk back about my experience with depression, because people are always, and Timothy, you said it so well, we are moving in and out of these various stages and cycles of our lives. And Walter Brueggemann, when he talked about the Psalms, talked about orientation, disorientation, new orientation. And all of our lives are constantly, if nothing else, COVID-19 has put us all in disorientation, right? Mm-hmm. And so the reality is our experiences as human beings is one that requires us to tell one another where we're finding the bread, because we're all beggars. We're all looking for a measure of healing, a measure of hope. We're all looking for ways to live our most expansive lives. And I believe what Jesus did for us is he said to the systems and to the old ways of being, the old ways of thinking, the old ways of doing things, hey, there's bread for everybody. And you don't have to jump any hoops to get to it. And so for me, my message around mental health is that I will always be talking about my personal experience in hopes that we can tear down the walls of shame around the discussion and the conversation, and then elevate the insight that is available to us. You know, now, thank God, so many African-American writers are writing about post-traumatic slave syndrome. The reality that as Black bodies living in this United States, this disjointed states of America, that we have some mental health challenges that are inherent to how we got to this land. And so for me, if I see my role as that of a teaching healer, helping empower people to access resources for their own mental and emotional well-being. And so for me, again, I can't say how we got here, but I hope that with this conversation, we can all be a part of how we're accessing hope, help, healing, and a future that will free our children's children. I'm a grandmother now. I want my grandchildren to know that they have access to healing for mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I echo that too. So many words popped out from Pastor Juanita. I think shame was a big one for me. And it kind of plays into this feeling that in our culture, I know certainly in my background, that there was this sort of muting of traumatic experiences that happened in our family. I was telling someone the other day that when I was 23, I was sitting with my grandmother, and she told the story of how my grandfather, my mother's father, was murdered in 1949 in Charleston, South Carolina, by a white mob that tracked him down and drowned him off the shore in Charleston. Of course, you know, 70% of the slaves came into that port. And so here he was, just coming back from the war, and was drowned there. Well, as my grandmother's telling the story, my mother's eyes get wide open. She never heard it until she heard it with her son about her father being killed and how it happened, because they muted it and the children were taught, don't talk about it. And so we often do that around so many traumatic experiences, and we don't talk about some of the pain, which leads us to try and figure things out when we're so ill-equipped and we have no template, no resources, and all these things, and you're afraid, and the fear that compounds all of this. So I started to say, I think that a big part of addressing it is creating this curiosity in our culture, bringing back up that it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to talk. It's okay to confront our pain. It's okay to deal with it. I mean, of course, you can't change anything you don't confront. And I think it's biblical. One of my favorite things to talk about, I mean, we're in this season where Mary is at the tomb, and there she is, realizing Jesus is not there. She turns around and thinks that she's talking to the gardener, tell me where he is so I can go get him. So here's what I said to our congregation. It's okay. I know we say this, don't question God, don't say that. It's okay, because if you don't, how do you grow? How do you discover? How do you develop spiritually? So that's kind of my platform for changing that whole narrative in the church and in the African-American culture. It's okay to question God. It's okay to talk. That's a part of our spiritual maturity and growth. So I think that, and then doing the necessary digging, is going to help change some generational ways of handling our trauma. And I think I've tried in some ways to model it. You know, I let my children see a therapist, and especially in this season, because I recognized what they were going through. And you know, they're in the third grade, the seventh grade, and 10th grade. And I realized they were struggling. And then with George Floyd and all of that they were seeing, they couldn't avoid it. They're TikTok lovers. And so I couldn't keep them from it. It was everywhere. So, I mean, you take that, the isolation, hey, we got to talk to somebody because, you know, there are questions that need to be asked that dad doesn't know to ask. And that's a part of changing things. So.
Pastor Stewart.
Okay, so for me, I think that my leads have been dysfunctional for me for a very long time. And when I say my leads have been dysfunctional for a very long time, I emotionally has been dysfunctional. My educationally background has been taught to me dysfunctionally. Financially, we are dysfunctional. And when I say dysfunction, I mean to the extent that we are not seeing a way out because no one is lighting it for us. And so I totally agree with Pastor Sloan and Pastor Rasmus when we look at this concept of that we've got to light the way. We also have to lead the way. And I'm appreciative that we're doing that work. But I also think that we also have to hammer down that what COVID has done is not shine the light, but magnified the brightness of the light of the gaps that we're seeing. It's not new news. I work in education. This is year 21. It is not new news that we have underfunded education. It's new news that it has become an inconvenience to all races, but it is not new news that we have underfunded the schools. It is not new news that social disparities have been in place, medical disparities have gotten in place. It's just that now it's magnified and it has impacted other places besides the minority communities. And so when I look at this conversation about what got us here, we know the things that got us here. It's just that they haven't gotten bigger. We've just shined a brighter light on it because we can't hide anymore. And, you know, deliver me from a bunch of people who want to hide and go seek from the real issues. We got to get confrontational. And so, you know, when we start looking at what we have to address, not only do we have to address it from the construct of we want our members to spiritually grow, but I also have to get you stabilized financially. I got to teach you how to budget. I got to teach you that your time and your net worth, not financially, but emotionally, your whole net worth, fractured, stretch marks, scars, all of that. Like, I need you to know I love all of that. Bring that so then we can all grow that together. But it's not a one-step process. You know, I really did believe that when you gave your right hand to the preacher, your heart to God, that everything would get better. And Dr. Autry, that is not my testimony. I actually feel like I was so Pepsi in Coke cans. I'm not quite sure what happened to my Coke, but just a few things didn't happen the way that I anticipated. But what God has always done for us, even in our failure to anticipate, he gives us access to people that can help us navigate these landmines called life, y'all. And they're real. Dr. Sloan is right. Children are suffering. The church, as much as we hate to admit it, it is a social institution. It is a spiritual place, but it is a social institution. And people miss the touch of their church. Even if it was 10 choir members and they all sung in 12 different keys, we missed the dysfunction of that choir. And that mean usher and that matron we couldn't stand. And Jerry, you know, to your point, I grew up in the Pentecostal church. You know, I'm Kojic bred. I don't hide my hand about it. I'm very proud of my Pentecostal background. But I just didn't go to that church you went to. Our pastor had a therapist to come to the church once a year, and he would go through each department and he would walk through and would tell us, you know, this team is dysfunctional because of this. Leaders were changed because of that recommendation. He didn't have to go pray about it. He said, your facts are applicable. Your facts are applicable to decisions. Your faith is applicable to the church. The two together help formulate your future. Pastor Lindsay is still pastoring the same church 47 years later at 81 years of age. And to this very day, that is what I function by. You need your facts, because whose report are you going to believe until you get the report? You got to know what to set before them, right? So you got to know your facts. Once you get your facts, you add your faith to it. That's how you formulate your decisions. And a lot of times our best thinking gets us in our worst trouble. We make permanent decisions using temporary facts or feelings, and then we get locked into a long-term emotional interest rate we just can't afford to pay. So I think that we got to get real clear about those things and teach our people, not just what the verse says about spiritual work, but what the verse says about how to connect it to the emotional work that is required to grow.
Thank you all for sharing that. I guess my next question is around how do we get the individuals and the families in our congregations to the point where they are receptive to and willing to go and get therapy. I know there's a lot of myths out there, like it's expensive. A lot of folks that I talk to are surprised to know that they can use their insurance. But some folks don't have insurance and they don't have the money. So then what do? Are there cost effective options out there for folks that don't have, like, how do we get information out there to get the individuals and the families? Because to Pastor Sloan's point, sometimes there are other individuals in the family as well that need that counseling. How do we get our people to the point where they're not just receptive and open, but they're willing to do it and they've got the information they need to go get it?
You know, for me, again, that goes back to this is an educational process. And, you know, unfortunately, everybody that Jesus came in contact with wasn't healed. There were some people that didn't get healed. All right. When he called Lazarus out of the tomb, everybody didn't get up. And it's because there's an element of timing that's involved in healing. And so I think we have to just keep saying the message over and over, just like people see commercials telling them to buy a certain kind of appliances and a certain kind of insurance and, you know, all the other kinds of things that we invest our monies in. And so for me, it's repetition is the best teacher, because at some point, a person is going to go through a crisis and they're going to go, wait a minute, the pastor mentioned and on the website, and we've had somebody come and talk. I need a therapist. And so it's about keeping the information out there, keeping it present. We can't tire of the message that there is hope and there's healing in the midst of mental health crisis. We can't tire of that message. I don't think I ever will. Tim, you said something about the generations. One of the things that happened for me is that my experience with depression, and I talk about it in Learning to Be, in that during that process, the Spirit was leading me through an awareness about what the healing process needed to look like for me. And I try to share some of those tools in Learning to Be. One of them was, I remember one day being at home, because during my recovery, I was at home. I asked my psychiatrist, why wasn't I hospitalized? And she basically said, Juanita, you had the family support, so you didn't need to go inpatient, all right? For me, all that really means is my people were awake enough to know what was going on and they were in communication with her, right? But one of the things that happened for me is the Spirit led me to do a genogram. And so I drew out my family tree as best I knew it at that point, right? And then the Spirit said, look at your grandmother on your maternal side. And I did, and I'm like, what am I looking for? He said, what does she do every time you see her? And I thought, oh, she was always sitting in the same chair. He said, do you know why? And I said, no. He said, she was depressed. Then he said, look at your mother on your paternal side. Every time you saw her, what was she doing? My grandmother on my father's side had a Chase lounge in her living room. Every time I saw her, she was in that Chase lounge. He said she was depressed. The source of their depression was different for each of them. My mother's grandmother lost a 12-year-old son to sickle cell anemia at a time when the doctors didn't know what to do with sickle cell. My father's mother was depressed because she had undiagnosed diabetes that she had had for years, undiagnosed. And so it gave me an opportunity to say, wait a minute. So there have been patterns that have been showing up in our family in a variety of ways, whether it was biological or it was because of a crisis, a death, a loss, but there are patterns. When you see all the women in your family with the life sucked out of them, and nobody's getting any care, then you know you have to be vigilant about getting your own care, because I am now helping to hopefully make a way for healing for generations that I'll never meet, but who will know that depression was found in our family, and we began to do some things about it. Education being one of them, seeing the necessary, getting the necessary help we needed being the second, and talking about it. It's not a secret. Nobody can shame me about the fact that I laid in bed so long that I smelled and didn't know what it was, but it was me. I can't be shamed by that. That story is the story that has saved my life and possibly will save my daughters and maybe my grandchildren, because we're not gonna let that story shame us. We're gonna let it be the way that we remember that there's hope and there's healing. It's available and it's possible. We have to learn to live with the diagnosis, and we have to learn to live differently.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that Pastor Rasmus has said. You know, when I shared my story publicly from the pulpit, I had no idea what it was going to mean that day, that how it was going to kind of shift things for our church and for me. But then I realized when you put that out there and everybody hears it, and then their first thought is, okay, well, I'm there too. Me too, Pass. And the hands start going up and people are crying. Now, the question is, how do we direct them? How do we kind of keep this conversation going? And I started, you know, I started thinking, my first thought is that me sharing and being open is a part of destigmatizing it in the African-American community for us. So I wanted that day, and from then on, people say it's okay to talk about it. If the pastor is telling you that, then it's okay. We can have this conversation. We can deal with it. Of course, the next step is that we've got to get you the proper help and kind of help in that process, because many people don't even know who to go to, don't know where to go, don't know where to turn, you know, all those different things. But for me, for the faith community, I think the consistent conversation does help to change the narrative, does help people kind of to feel like it's okay. And I love what Pastor Juanita said. We're not going to be shamed. So, you know, we're not shamed anymore about it. Now we've got to turn it to how can I use it as a ministry tool. I posted a video a couple of weeks ago on Facebook that went viral. And it was a video of me sitting back here one Saturday night in my office, preparing to preach. And I was talking to a member who's transitioning. Her daughter was transitioning. And my daughter, who was a dancer, her daughter was a dancer. My daughter was a dancer. Hers was transitioning from cancer. My daughter was dancing at a high school. And so after I prayed with the mother, I kind of had this moment where here I am in tears, and I did this confessional, you know, and I said, oh, should I share this or not? Maybe I'll take it down. But it went viral. And I had so many people saying, pastors saying, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for doing that. Please don't take it down, because I'm feeling the same way. I'm going through the same thing, this dealing with COVID, dealing with the weight of it. So when I did that, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to say to faith leaders, it's okay for you to face the humanity, the struggles that you have, the emotional challenges you're facing in this season, not being able to be present with your parishioners, dealing with your own personal weight. And so one of the people who commented, a friend of mine, said, you know, if anybody was going to share something like this, it's Tim Sloan, because he's comfortable with being transparent. And I think that really helped me. People kind of know, you know, that's kind of my MO, you know. I think transparency, vulnerability, you know, sends a message of some strength, you know. So I hope that as a part of using influence for our parishioners, that we do kind of generationally change the narrative that my children's, Pastor Juanita said, my children say it's okay to talk about this. My dad and mom talked about it when I was growing up. They gave us somebody just to talk to wrestle with our own challenges, you know? So I hope, hopefully generationally now, we're starting to change some things.
Thanks. Pastor Stewart, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to stamp this. So, you know, my twin, Shon is my twin. We different mothers, but we the same brother. So, you know, that's my twin. And he keeps hammering me in the public about this book. And I keep trying to hammer him back, like, stop it. But I will say this, in education, especially, we work with this thing called the IEP. If you know anything about it, then, you know, especially it deals with federal laws, and we have to construct this document that we have an ARD process, which is an annual review determination, and we figure out how a kid is firing off in their learning capabilities. So we do an evaluation called the full individual evaluation. We determine how that kid is functioning. Once we figure that out, then we come back and say in a meeting, how are we going to write this plan specifically tailored for this kid, for their success, right? And when I look at what we're saying here, we're doing the same thing. We're writing an IEP. It's just that we're adding a few extra elements. We're writing about it's individualized. We're saying that each person needs something different. Pastor Rasmus, Pastor Sloan, my story, all different, but we all same trajectory, but we all had to go through it a different way. You know, we had to arrive to it a different way, and that's okay. I think we need to stamp that each person's process will be individual. I think the next thing we need to talk about is that it comes in 3 steps. We have to educate, and I believe in that. We got to educate. You know, as much as I hate to say this, we've got to get the therapists in the churches on Sundays. I know that that's foreign. It's foreign. I know that's foreign because the pulpit is political, and I know that we got to say certain things, but every now and again, it's good to go off script and get somebody in there that can talk about some of these things and connect it to the Bible. And then we've got to engage our people with the education. After they come show us what to do, we got to engage our people with ongoing supportive services. We should have the therapists in the room. We should be, if they're not a part of our membership, then when we do new members orientation, we need to find out, do you need to talk to somebody? And if so, how do we engage you with that? Because if we can get one person in the family connected to therapy, then we can start connecting the whole house. It really is, and I hate to use this church term, but it is breaking the generational cycle of us not addressing the mental health issue. And it is not a spirit. It is a spirit of stubbornness, but even that can be broken if you're from the country. And then I think we got to talk about our elevation. You know, I'm from, you know, Pastor Rasmus, you know, the horse can be broken, so can behavior. It's all about the consistency. And so when we look at the elevation, we've got to get down to the fact that we want to see our people successful. And so we've got to tell them it's not just therapy. This is your elevation. This is your way out. It is how you frame it. And then I think from there we get to the person. And so I do believe we have to develop an IEP as emotions as a second language. We got to look at how that attaches to that person individually. I think I'm done.
Amen to all 3 of you, your perspectives on there. I think that before I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I do want to make sure we have time for questions and answers as well. If you don't mind, can we get a little personal? And if you can let us know to whatever level of comfort you have. I believe each ministry has a DNA. I believe that each ministry is called to a people, called to serve a people, whether it's a neighborhood, whether it's a city, whether it, some folks are called to national platforms or international platforms and so forth. Some people are called to, hurting women and so forth. But for your ministry, for your calling, and why God placed you here in Houston, Texas, as a pastor, what are you seeing in your congregation, and what are people dealing with? What are some of these hard-hitting things that are fighting us invisibly that you as a pastor have to be conscious and aware of when you stand in that pulpit every Sunday?
I'll kick us off with that one. So I lead an affirming and inclusive church. We really are open, affirming, and inclusive. I really don't care what your sexual orientation is and all of that. I do care that you have a relationship with the God that I believe in. I do care that you're able to connect with God in some personal way. And so I'm attached to the marginalized, the minimalized. I'm attached to the shrewd, the put to the side. I'm attached to the thug that's coming to church tatted with earrings and nose rings. I'm attached to the person that cussed in the parking lot on their way as they had one foot through the door and one foot out the door, because he probably cursed about the very thing that was in my mind. I just didn't say it at the time. And so he beat me to it. He beat me to it. And so I'm connected to the people that don't look like what church used to look like. And I'm okay with that because my assignment is different. And I've had to learn to sit with that because it's not always, you know, when you look at this thing called ministry, you always hope to aspire to what you see, but sometimes what you see and what God expects of you are always two separate spectrums, and you have to kind of get locked into that one. So that's who we deal with, and we focus on mental health and relationships in your spiritual journey. We really do spend a lot of time digging into that.
Well, for us, our sort of mission has never changed. In the 19 years I've been here, we always say in our statement that we take the best of the traditional, connected to the contemporary to create this emerging model. Because when I took this church, it was very traditional, everything was just traditional. So much so that I would ask, why are you doing that? And they'd be like, we just always done it, you know? Why do y'all keep that over there? We just, you know. So I've always said that there are things traditionally that are good, and I think it's critical. I mean, I'm a kid who grew up, you know, with anthems, and so I love anthems and hymns. You know, when I'm at Morehouse, that's kind of how I mean, I love that. But I also grew up, you know, when we started getting into the gospel in a different way. You know, I started being around that shift, so I can go kind of either way, and in this sort of suburban congregation here, I think for me, I'm very attuned to the social challenges that African Americans feel. So you'll hear in my voice, you'll hear sort of ingrained in what we do. The residue is that it's always dealing with, as Pastor Shon said, the oppressed, the marginalized. We're dealing with those who are on the fringes of society. You know, my pastor, William A. Lawson, used to always talk about, you know, ministry to the miserable and to the marginalized. And so that was always something that really was a part of me. But I also believe that we deal with the hard to address issues socially. So when we talk about George Floyd, let's deal with that. Let's deal with the trauma. Let's deal with Breonna Taylor. Let's not forget her name. Let's talk about the Sandra Bland's. But let's talk about all those different events. But let's get underneath and deal more with why. And so I think for me, part of who I am that you'll kind of sense in our church is this willingness to be vulnerable with our feelings, to talk about them, to be open about them, to talk about some of our pain, our generational challenges. And so I really think now in this season, it's dealing with the trauma that so many of us are carrying. And I'm starting to really see that I'm talking to many of my people, especially in the midst of this COVID time. Somebody was asking me, I was dealing with, trying to get people to talk about vaccine and kind of, getting African Americans, people of color to say it's okay to take the vaccine. We can get past our mistrust. And I started realizing, what a lot of our mistrust is? It's the trauma that has been passed down generationally that has accumulated, and the fact that our families and our bodies have both started to record the history of that trauma without ever dealing with it. So now there's just this constant snowball effect and this growing accumulation. So at the heart of this now, I find myself saying, how do we deal with the trauma? How do we face it? How do we acknowledge it? And I think that's going to be a big part of this next season, is that when we come out and everybody's saying, let's get back to normal, there's some trauma we got. And if we don't deal with that trauma coming out of this, we're going to cast an even heavier burden on this next generation. And it's not just about getting back into open space and worshiping. We want to worship in a healthy capacity.
You know, in many ways, I could say ditto to Shon, ditto to Timothy. When we got to St. John's, literally, we realized our ministry at that time was going to be to the homeless community, because they were literally sleeping on the doorsteps of the church. And so out of the homeless community grew our 12-step support community. And so we've always been a place for, if you looked at scripture, Matthew 25:25, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was sick and in prison, you came to see about me. Our ministry has always met and reached out to people who found themselves hungry, thirsty, in prison. We have a Pathway to Freedom ministry that helps to empower men and women who are returning citizens who need support in getting on their feet and reclaiming their citizenry. We are right now providing to about 1,000 to 2,000 families a week on Wednesdays. They're popping their trunks and we're filling it with groceries. We have always been a disaster relief emergency room. And so what that means is you are constantly, in some cases, repeating the same message over and over, because the doors are evolving. Who's sitting in the intensive care is not the same person that was in intensive care last week. And so for us, St. John's has always, to me, been a lighthouse, a place for people who have been battered against by the waves of life, who found themselves bruised and who are needing healing, who are needing a safe place for hope. As we move forward, Rudy is right now, he finished his doctorate a couple of years ago, and he's really been focused on where's the church gonna go? Because in many ways, those who are between, I think it's 20, whatever the age, I don't want to say millennials, but that's the only way I can think of it right now. But the people who are falling in the group with millennials, I don't remember the age. But he's saying we have missed them because the church has not stood up and vocalized in ways that help them to see that we could be advocates in the struggle for justice in America. And so much of what Rudy does is to lead as an activist. I lead as a contemplative. I'm a person who believes in prayer. I was recently talking to Dr. Virgil Wood, who marched with Martin Luther King. And I asked him, I said, Dr. Wood, how did y'all decide who would sit at the soda fountains and have hot coffee poured on them, and who would walk and let dogs be nipping at their heels? How did y'all decide that? And he said, we basically said to people, if you don't think that you can stand in those places of challenge, then we need you on your knees. And so I'm an on my knees person, but I'm not afraid to stand up when I need to stand up. And so what I try to do in my role as a leader at St. John's is to empower people to utilize tools that can help them fight the good fight. So prayer is definitely one of them for me. Scripture study is important. Memorizing scripture is important. But there are some ancient practices too, like Lectio Divina. And that's reading the word in such a way that the word gets to read you. Instead of you saying, oh, that's a familiar passage. I know how that story is going to end. No, I say, what is he saying to me? How is the Spirit speaking to me out of that text? Using practices like the examine, where each day you look for what was good. Because even in COVID-19, even with the social justice uprising, even with a bipolar political environment, there has been some good. And it's the good that empowers us to be able to have some stamina and some resistance. And so I try to train people in ways that will empower them, that when they find themselves being stretched out thin, there's a resource within. They've cultivated an inner life that can help support them and sustain them through difficulty. So yes, ditto to Tim, ditto to Shon, but things that, you know, I started to ask Shon, I know Tim is in Humble. Shon, where is your church located?
We're online virtual. We share space in Resurrection with Pastor Troy.
Okay.
But until we get back, we're straight virtual.
Yeah, well, we are too.
Okay, yeah.
And I was just wondering, because the reality is, it sounds to me that on this particular gathering, you have 3 congregations of people who are saying we're trying to be light in dark places.
Mhm.
I'll tell you, all the people in my head are screaming right now. The whole committee is screaming right now and chanting and cheering these 3 pastors. I feel like I've been to church. Before I open the floor for questions, I will be candid and say this was the hardest session of my life to moderate, because being a preacher as well, like I just want to just jump in and have this dialogue, this conversation with you all. Kudos to you for heeding the call of true ministry, and that is to be the light in darkness. That is to be that hope. That is to provide help. That's to meet people at their needs. If we're not meeting needs, what are we doing? And why? You know, so just I appreciate you all, and I want to open the floor. Does anybody have any questions for our speakers? Go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask.
Sandra, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. This is to all 3 of you. And Pastor Rasmus, you talked about post-traumatic slave disorder, and I happen to have read that book. Additionally, Pastor Sloan, you talked about, you know, the impact of society on mental health. So here's the question. I'm sorry, it's going to be a little long-winded. The intersection of race, mental health, and spirituality in, I hate to bring up the DSM-5, but therapists use the DSM-5. But the more I get into people's histories, particularly Black people, I have a lot of clients whose parents grew up in segregation. And candidly, their moms are really angry people. And if you didn't know history, a therapist could easily say, oh yeah, they got borderline personality disorder. And if a Black man is suspicious of the police, I don't know if they're doing this now, but they were, he was automatically diagnosed as having paranoid schizophrenia. And I was at workshops where that was stated. So that's in my memory and not a distant one. And so it seems to me that particularly when you get to the classifications of personality disorders, that members of the Black community are hugely disturbed. And that's an example of the intersection of racism, mental health, and spirituality. And I would just like y'all's input on that, because it's something that's been running in my head lately.
Well, thank you for your question, Sandra. You know, the reality is, I've taken some classes in psychology at Houston Graduate School of Theology because I was thinking that I was going to move towards psychology at some point in my life. But history, when a person walks into a therapeutic environment, they bring their history. What we now know is they not only bring the active conscious memory, but they bring the unconscious as well. One of the things I recently read was a research report that shows that African-American women in this country have less telomeres, which are the, if I can just say, the connecting tissue in the, and see, this is where I've stepped out of my lane, right? But it's the connecting tissues in the brain that cause the brain to function in a certain, what we would consider healthy way, that Black women, because of trauma and stress and racism and slavery have less of those connecting telomeres. And there's research now that shows this. So what we have to do is recognize that in many ways, there's got to be a model and models for caring for the mental health and well-being of African-American people, people of African-American descent. I have been doing a lot of reading because I want to be open not only to those various ways, so that when a person asks me, Juanita, what do you think about the fact that I think I see spirits? That it won't freak me out, right? Why? Because I've had my own experience with seeing spirits. There's a book called Grandma's Hand, and I can't remember the author's name, but this book is so profound about how we can help heal Black people from the traumas that we have experienced by living in America. And so, Sandra, thank you for being willing to read. Thank you for attending workshops where you can hear another story, you can hear another language, you can hear, when the first time I saw a psychotherapist was for getting my license as a pastor, and a friend had prepared me. Oh, the book is My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, Resmaamenakem is his name. And so that's the book. My husband just stepped in, so thank you for sharing that. But the first thing I did was I had to see a psychotherapist, and a friend of mine said, be prepared. They're gonna say you're an angry Black woman. And sure enough, I was diagnosed as an angry Black woman. And you know what I did? My unconscious spoke for me that day and said something that my conscious mind never would have. And I said to the white male therapist, you'd be mad too if you were a Black woman living in a white man's world. And so I think as therapists, as mental health practitioners, you have to be aware of the world that comes in when we sit in the therapist chair, when we sit on the therapist couch. And Sandra, I want to say, I know that you are open to that awareness, and I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo Pastor Juanita's comments as well, and thank you, Sandra, for that question. I read somewhere recently that I hope I'm speaking correctly, that life expectancy for Blacks has gone down over the past year. We've discovered, and then I started digging into the whole conversation about weathering, and you probably know a lot more about that than I do. But for many African Americans, it's not just facing this one singular issue or these issues that we've dealt with over the past year during this kind of social awakening. It's again the weathering. It's the stories and the impact for years that have accumulated. So when we come to this conversation, we're not just carrying COVID and this social challenge. We're dealing with Black men and Black women always having to worry about whether or not they'll be accepted, or whether they're imposters, or trying to be better, or dealing with all the different rules that we've heard about how you handle yourself, what not to say, with your hands in your pocket, And I'm trying to get my golf game together, and I'm doing pretty good. I got a coach. And the other day I took a long lesson. Then I went out to play, and I just started hitting the ball everywhere. And I was telling my partner, my friend, I was like, man, I'm trying to remember everything, and I'm locked up. I'm trying to remember, keep your arms straight, push your elbows out, keep your hip here, legs straight, all these different things, to where I was just locked up and just was not able to perform. And I think that's a lot like what happens for many of us. We're trying to remember all these rules. Don't talk too fast. Don't look at this person. Make sure your hands in your pocket. Don't get too close when you walk by them. all these different things for Blacks, for African Americans that are unspoken. You know, I'm raising a 9-year-old son, and I'm afraid he lives in a gated subdivision. And my friends asked me the other night, my neighbor said, would you talk about that a little bit? And I was like, hey, listen, because our neighbor just got elected judge. And I was like, I don't want to rain on the party tonight. But since you asked, I'm afraid of sending my 9-year-old son outside to walk the dog, because I'm afraid in this climate, he's a big kid. He's just a little bit bigger for his age. I'm afraid of how he'll be perceived, and he doesn't know the rules yet. He doesn't know the rules. I haven't had time. So that's all this weight, you know, and so we carry that not only in our day-to-day aspects, but we carry that to the pulpit. We carry that to the conferences. We carry that to the conversation, you know, all these different things. And so I worry about that intersection, and how do we deal with it in church? How does the church address that? How do we talk about it? How do we provide a space for that conversation? But how, more importantly, do we get the information that we need kind of to help walk people through that and be aware of it?
I'm gonna touch it just a little bit, but I'm gonna push the table. I believe that whether it's the DSM-4 or the DSM-5, I'm going to frame it a different way. I'm a cancer survivor, stage 4 metastasized B-cell non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. 4 transplants later, we finally got that thing right. The one thing, twin, the doctor told me is that I couldn't have the transplant I needed to save my life, because she simply said, you suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm like, how in the hell do you go from cancer to, is something wrong with my mind? Like, I need you to fix the cancer. And she said something, Pastor Sloan, and I will not lie. I was going to tighten her up like a demon in the Pentecostal church. I was going to get her, because she said to me, until you get your mind right, your body won't heal. And I looked at her and I'm like, okay, fine. So she said, you need to see a therapist. I said, fine. So Shon, she sent the therapist in. The woman came to see me. I was in the hospital from August until April straight. I lived on the 8th floor of cell and gene therapy of Methodist Hospital from August until April. Had not one thing to do with the cancer. It had everything to do, I couldn't get my mind wrapped around that I needed a counselor. Okay, let's put that in frame, that I needed a counselor. And I'm saying that to say, when I was first diagnosed, I was at MD Anderson and they couldn't find the cancer. It was an Indian doctor covered in hijab walking down through the bottom of the hospital who walked by and said, the reason they can't see your cancer is they're using old ways to diagnose a new situation. And I'm saying that with the DSM-4, the DSM-5, until we get clear about what the situation is, regardless of the book, because here is what we know. The way that Black people are diagnosed for medical treatment is not the same metrics that are used when we diagnose our other counterparts. And so the same rule applies when we look at therapy and counseling, when we do needs assessment, because I see it all the time when we do evaluations for kids at a special ed. The evaluation metrics don't always work the same because of the way that the disability hits and the environment that the kid was tested in and what they come from. So I am saying that when we look at this thing, yes, the DSM-4 and 5 is clearly needed. I am saying that I love the fact, Sandra, that you use a very clear eye to filter what you're looking at, how you're looking at it, and you take the time to dig on how you're going to support your client. If I could get you to put that in a real Coke bottle and sell it to some of our friends, and we could shake it up and sprinkle it on them, because a lot of times we're missing the needs of people because we're only using that one lens. And progressive bifocals, even though Pastor Rasmus don't have hers, I got mine on for her, is I need some things brought in for me so I can see it closely. And then there's some things I need pushed away and close up at the same time, because depending on the situation determines how I need to look at it. And so I just want to encourage you, keep looking at it. Don't be scared to get out there and push the house, because most people are current to the table being pushed. Push the house. I'll come help you. Call me. I got you. But I am encouraged that you're looking beyond the scope of the training that they gave you. And I just want to give you a big shout out for that.
Can I respond to you, Shon? I would really like to. several things were running through my head. When I was in analytical training, they told me no matter what any book says about any symbol, the symbol means what it means to the person who's having the dream and their life. In diagnostics, I'll start my 50th year in September as a psychotherapist. And I hate the diagnostic manuals and I love them. I love them because they sort of are really making an effort to try and understand what goes on in our body, mind, soul. But we have to listen. We have to listen with our eyes, with our ears, with our nose, with our skin, with our instincts. We have to listen. And then we discover what's ailing them. If we can't go in naked, how do we expect them to be naked? We have to be full but empty simultaneously. As a clinician, we have to trust that we have enough knowledge inside. And when we don't, go get supervision and figure it out, because it'll be about you and not about them. And I so encouraged to hear what all four of you are doing in your efforts and your love for your people. And I love my work that I do as well. I have a deep passion for it. I wouldn't have lasted this long if I didn't. Thank you for what you're doing. It's wonderful. Keep doing it. Just keep doing it.
Thank you. I did see, Brother Moderator, someone raised a question on something about LGBTQI in church or something like that.
Yes, we only had a few minutes, but I was hoping one or a couple of you would be able to address that question around what type of support you're providing for the LGBT community and the specific stressors, challenges, and so forth that they face.
I work with a couple of other local pastors, Pastor Troy from Resurrection, Pastor Marvetta Walker leads Fresh Wind, used to be the old PODCC back in the day. It's a couple of other ones. We all get together and we are working with the city to connect people to services. We're finding out where services are. And what we're also learning as we're doing the dig, my pastor would always say the only place faith is applicable is in the church. Everywhere else you need the facts to make the decision. And so the data is showing that there is a great gap in this level of services and care that we find for LGBTQI, African American, and our transgender partners. And so I am finding that it is a bit more challenging in a city as big as Houston to get them, but they're there, but you almost have to have a hound dog to go look for them, to make them, they're there and the people are willing to do the work. The other thing that we're doing is connecting people to services that actually align with who they are and then connected. And when they get there, we also transition them from, if I need spiritual counseling, I'm going to Pastor Sloan. If I need to talk about my depression as a pastor before I go to the therapist, I'm calling Juanita. But then after I talk to the two of them, I've got to have enough sense to know that this is beyond the scope and connect and transition them to someone else that can support them. And so what I've found is that as I'm doing this work and we're building connections, is that we're finding therapists that will see our members, regardless of their sexuality, and connect them to the therapeutic services that they need. Because again, I do all things spiritual well. I even do all things education well. But that counseling stuff, outside of me praying for you, I'm gonna get you to somebody that can help you.
One of the things that Shon said was that his congregation is an affirming, did you say affirming and accepting congregation? St. John's, we've always been affirming and accepting. Matter of fact, the funeral I'm sitting at now is for a couple, a gay couple, husband. The husband lost his husband. St. John's has always been on the cutting edge of being present to people who need to be loved. And we don't care how this shows up. We ain't scared. And the key for us is always, I want to thank my husband. He's holding my iPad for me now. Thank you. But the reality is, there's really only one commodity we have: unconditional love and acceptance. And so St. John's has always tried to be a place. Matter of fact, Pastor Tim, you'd appreciate this. We've lost thousands because St. John's has been a place of unconditional love and acceptance, period. My husband wrote a book called Love, Period. He wasn't joking. So I hope that helps. We've been a place where people can call St. John's home. Now, needless to say, because we're a United Methodist Church, that has been a theme. But we work with things because we love people.
We're out of time. I just want to say thank you to our panelists. I love y'all.
We love you, Jeff.
I
mean,
really
Jerry.
do. Wow, I wish I could spend more time with y'all. Thank you for what you do and for who you are. I often say we're human beings, not human doings, but what we do matter. And I just love the person that you all brought to the table today, to this conversation, your transparency, your honesty, your willingness to talk, to have the conversation and hit big issues, and for loving people the way you do in action, not just in word. Every day you're rolling up your sleeves. It's not a photo op for you. You're out there doing the work. And I just want to say thank you to all of you, and to our host today for allowing us to have this conversation.
Jerry, thank you so much. This has been absolutely riveting. And thank you so much for holding the space. And thank you, Reverend Juanita and Reverend Shon and Reverend Timothy. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Been our pleasure.
Yeah, this has been a joy, a true joy.
Let's do it again sometime, y'all.
We would love to create that. We would love to make that happen. Create the space for it. Yeah, thank you so much.